Good morning, everyone. This is Tom with Certified. We've got a large group that signed up for today's webinar to catch a fraudster. And we have some just incredibly special guests with us from the United States Secret Service. So I'm going to give just another 60 seconds or so to let everyone come into the room, and then we will get started diving into ransomware today. So we'll be with you in just a second. Rita, Stephen, you can still see my screen okay?
Yep. Sure can.
All right, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. In the interest of time, we have some really good content to cover. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Tom. I'm one of the co-founders of Certified. Also a wire fraud victim, attorney, and large title agent. And you can see by the small creature behind me working from home today. So hopefully not too many disruptions. The To Catch Your Fraudster webinar series is something that we put a lot of time into each and every month, with the idea of bringing to you kind of fresh topics and examples and things that are trending in the area of not only wire fraud, but branching out into other areas of cybersecurity and awareness. And just speaking with most of you as title professionals on the webinar today, this is just becoming an ever concerning area of our business that we have to manage and we have to mitigate. And in light of what happened, just a few weeks ago in the Fraudster ransomware breach, that was another indication that our industry, unfortunately, will continue to be targeted in these scams. So every month, like I say, we're trying to provide something that you can bring back to your organizations, your referral partners, and your consumers on what to watch out for. So without further ado, we are going to launch into a discussion around ransomware. We have with us Rita Martin. So Rita, I don't even know what you do. It scares me what you do, getting to know you over the last couple of days, but you are at the tip of the spear on ransomware and what's going on in this area. She's a special agent with the US Secret Service, and coming back, our friend Stephen Dougherty, who give us an update on business email compromise and just how these networks are converging into these two main areas of cyber fraud. So we have to manage business email compromise, which is monetized through wire fraud. And now we're looking over our shoulder on ransomware itself. So just to give a quick update, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Rita. How bad is the problem? If you think about just the instances that we're seeing right now on DEC and ransomware, it's just an onslaught. And Stephen, I think you'd agree, and Rita, you probably would as well, is that we've just seen so much of it this year. I mean, our hypothesis is that with the money that they gained from PPP and unemployment and other scams last year, it's like they're just so well funded to focus this year in these two areas. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I'll talk a little bit more about how this is really just a target-rich environment from their perspective. And we hope to partner with your audience today, with everyone who's on the webinar, to continue to be an excellent partner before, during, and God forbid, after any kind of incident. But basically, part of this conversation is a little bit eat your vegetables, so that that target-rich environment potentially no longer continues to exist. I won't steal your thunder because you've got some excellent reporting and statistics here, but those are absolutely the two areas where I can see your audience potentially being vulnerable.
Stephen, roll in on BEC. I mean, we've had so much activity together this year, but what's keeping you up at night on the BEC wire fraud front?
I mean, just the amount that it's occurring. We saw a dip in BEC activity last summer and fall because the criminal networks had pivoted to doing unemployment insurance fraud, SBA loan fraud, and other COVID-19 related fraud and pandemic frauds. So we saw them kind of move away a little bit. But what happens with BEC is they have already set up, they've already done the intrusions, and they just sit there waiting. So now they've developed a wealth of targets, a wealth of good intelligence that they can then use to go and launch these attacks. So we saw that sort of lull, and then we saw an exponential increase once they pivoted back from the SBA loan fraud and the unemployment insurance fraud. And from there, they already had a very well-established network of money mules. And just the way they're moving money has become so incredibly efficient and fast that they're just hopping on these left and right, and it's become incredibly profitable. And as things become profitable, the more they get done, the more they want to keep doing them. So it's keep me up at night.
I want to come back to that, this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And Rita, you and I touched on that yesterday a little bit, but let's just run over, Rita, what is ransomware and why should we care about it? And when I speak about this, I'm speaking as an industry participant now.
Sure. Ransomware is a name for a particular flavor of malware. And when I think malware, I just think bad software. So I want all of your audience to think about all of the different pieces of software that maybe you know about and others that you likely don't, that allow your business to operate day in and day out. Where would your business be if all of a sudden every piece of that software infrastructure was inoperable, right? And we know that every single piece of software, by the time that it gets to market, something about every 7 lines of code, there's at least one error, right? Or one bug. All it takes is for one of those bugs to be, leveraged by one of these bad actors to deploy this ransomware that will essentially do one of two things: lock your systems and demand you to enter some sort of negotiation with them to get that access back, or to actually steal your data, take it away from you. And then that extortion piece becomes a little bit about sharing your sensitive data with the public. I'll stop there because I know that I got into a little bit more than just the definition, but that's the reason why this is such a time-sensitive issue.
No, let's continue on. I like this. So I told you this is going to be a bar stool chat, right?
Yep.
I'm not wed to anything we prepared in advance. So when we think about malware, I used to think, and frankly, before this, I really didn't know much about ransomware. I think it was one of those like, yeah, they're going to take down infrastructure. They're going to try to take down, some other industry, certainly not, the title sector or settlement. Is it moving not only to locking you out of your program, but holding the data hostage as an additional leverage point? Or do you see it like in either or? Because that to me is scary. It's one thing I can't access my systems. It's another thing saying, if you don't pay me a ransom, I'm going to take all of this PII that I have on your server that I scraped, and I'm gonna just send that out into the open web, because that would put on me an onus to report and do a bunch of things that I wouldn't know how to estimate the cost of that.
Sure. Unfortunately, the answer is both, which is probably the most scary option of those two things that you just mentioned, right? And I'll tell you the reason for that. Ransomware is following these other trends, perhaps not as much as BECs, but, perhaps more than the BEC threat. But ransomware is following these other threats that we follow, in that it is coming online to the as-a-service platform, right? So perhaps you and your co-conspirators don't have the technical ability to deploy ransomware on, for example, someone who's on this webinar today. But for the low price of being able to pay the networks of people who do have that technical ability, who do have that infrastructure in place, they could deploy it on your behalf. So this ransomware as a service model is the scariest, because it means that there is just a huge network of bad actors who are participating in this trend, and it makes the threat patterns a little bit harder for us to track. I'll talk a little bit later about the different variants and what we mean when we say variants, but this as a service platform means that it is just rampant, and the cost of entry is lower than you would probably guess.
Stephen, anything to pile on there?
So, along with BEC, I talked about the enterprise business model that goes along with it, and ransomware fits right in, particularly when Rita talks about it as the service. And that's what's particularly scary. And one thing I do want to touch upon, when we talked about what the threat actors are doing with your data. I mean, when a ransomware attack is deployed, generally they're not just putting your data in a box and not looking at it. They're going through and parsing everything they can to then use later. And I say, what's the main fuel of business email compromise? It's that privileged and contemporaneous information. So they're getting that in the ransomware attack because they're seeing it, then they're holding that and then using it later against you or your client or a vendor you work with to get them to send an unauthorized wire. And I've seen this firsthand. I've responded to victims of BECs. And I say, okay, tell me what happened. And lo and behold, they'll say, hey, yeah, 3 months ago, we had a ransomware attack. And instead of really fixing anything, we just threw out our computers and got new email addresses and moved on. And it's like, okay, well, they were still sitting in there monitoring all your stuff and set up email rules and all sorts of different things to use to get information from them. So these attacks are becoming more and more interrelated.
No, and just on this slide, and I'll go back to a couple that we looked at, was that it is so well funded and organized, it seems. And Stephen, you and I have worked so many recoveries where you can almost tell if it's kind of a rookie or a pro job, right? And the money moving within hours or minutes versus days, or maybe even after a week, there's a packet of funds still left in a fraudulent account. I'd like to say this because my brain's like an Etch-a-Sketch and I'll forget to say it. As an industry, we really need to think clinically about the information that we're storing on our servers. So take a step back on a buyer side file and both sides, buyer, sell side. On the sell side, you're going to have a federal document for taxes. You're going to have a 1099-S. You're going to have a Patriot Act form that has PII in it. The buyer side, if they're using a mortgage lender, is going to have a 1003, a bunch of different disclosures, all the information. I mean, that has account level information. And sometimes they're sending over the loan application, even though you're not asking for it. And that's even worse. You're having the loan application, again, signed at closing. And I can tell you that it's time as an industry to start to rethink about the active data that we're storing on our network and we have access to versus the type of data that could be pushed away either in cold storage or something that isn't visible to the open network. That is more of a digital archive. And this is something we're in the process of doing in our agency as well, because yes, I've got underwriter requirements and the mortgage lender has to have records up to the life of the loan, which could be 30 years. And I got the IRS and I got all this stuff. That's fine. But how much readily accessible PII do you actually need at your fingertips versus those that it would be acceptable to have the next day or within a few hours, even though it might take a little bit more time and add a little bit more friction. So I just wanted to kind of insert that into the conversation here. Rita, can you walk through, so ransomware, bad software that does bad things. I either can't get to my stuff or they stole my stuff and they're threatening without payment, they're going to release it on the open web, which triggers a whole bunch of other stuff. Is that a fair high level overview? Oh, you're on mute still.
Sorry about that. Absolutely. And I want to give your audience a little bit more about my background. So I am a trained network intrusion responder through the Secret Service, and I have been at a couple of different angles of responses of these situations. So I will do my best not to dive deep into the nerd speak. But if you or your CISOs want more specific information, please give us a call, because that's part of our job as well, is to liaise at that level. But yes, so this can be something as simple as a phishing email. And in fact, a phishing email is one of the main ways that we see that initial access point be obtained by our actors. So there are a few different phases of a breach, particularly a ransomware job, and that initial access. I mean, I want to say anywhere between 70 to 80% of the time is that phishing email. And that's what allows bad actors to gain entry into your network, take a look around, do their reconnaissance, take that current level of privilege, escalate it to something a little more dangerous, like an admin account or something like that, so that that eventual locker and decrypting, or excuse me, locker and encrypting malware can be deployed in your systems. That demand portion of it is actually where we see some of the most heartbreaking implications of this. We are currently managing several informants who are attempting to get access into how this process works. And one of the ways that we're doing that is being up on what are called these negotiator panels. The slide that you had before it displayed this very structured and very mafia or crime boss type organization, and that's absolutely true. There's an entire layer of bad actors who all they do is negotiate ransoms, and some of the data from those sources is just heartbreaking. One that I shared with Tom as we were preparing for this call was where a local school board had been had fallen victim to ransomware, and the negotiator was telling the end victim, potentially in this situation, God forbid, someone on this call, hey, we have pictures of all of the children. We will share them with known child exploitation actors. We'll share them on all of these terrible forums where these people go to meet and consume that illicit material if you don't pay the demand, right? Our own agency has been on the ground in a protective mission more than once when a city or local PD, their entire radio communications platform has been taken offline because of a ransomware incident. No one wants to look to that detail leader and tell them, hey, boss, I know that we're here working this visit of one of our protectees, either the vice president or the president, and the local police department. They have no radio comms with each other, let alone us. That was a bad day, right? There are these real kinetic implications. And I think until you really think about the crown jewels that you possess, kind of what you were detailing just now, Tom, that PII, that federal tax data, all of those things that are sensitive, until you really catalog all of that and really sit down and determine what really is needed to be accessed online, then it really gets you thinking about how you potentially could fall victim.
Yeah, and I think as an industry, we've been dealing with a great recession. We had federal changes in TRID, and then we have now the COVID recession. I mean, there's just been enough coming our way that we weren't looking around for other things to think about. But the more recent incident in our industry is bringing it to the forefront, where I agree, we have to start thinking more strategically and clinically about the information that we're holding and the way that it's stored and protected, and how connected it is to, like you say, a simple, I did not update my software, or somebody came through the mail server because of a phish, and all of a sudden, they're taking down the whole thing. Stephen, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, just again, more of the scale. And, I always try to think about things and what's coming down the road. So obviously with the pandemic back in February 2020, I was thinking, okay, it's going to get hit. Well, what just got signed yesterday? A $1 trillion infrastructure bill. A lot of money is going to be doled out for that for different things. So again, if any of your agencies, or as Rita was talking about, local municipalities and stuff like that, they are going to be receiving some of those funds, and it's only going to get worse. So we have to get more and more vigilant with our footing and our defense.
No, totally agree. All right, let me see if I can make a little bit of progress here. Ransomware is a cybercrime that has been tracked by the FBI through the IC3 unit. You can see by the numbers here that we had reporting. There was a massive step up in 2020. I'll note, though, that while ransomware gets all the headlines, BEC dwarfs the amount of reported losses than what ransomware has taken right now. And ransomware is the $5 million demand or the $20 million demand. I mean, these are big numbers that typically hit brand household names or infrastructure. But if we assume a 30% year-over-year growth rate, you can see by 2025, we're going to more than 3x where we are right now. And that's a blink of an eye away. And everything that I've seen in BEC, and Rita, you don't have to confirm this, but these numbers are probably light. Like there are probably ransoms that are taking place that are being paid in smaller buckets or packets that never go reported. Law enforcement at Rita's level or at the FBI level is never notified for fear of reputational risk or branding or those things. It's like, look, I can pay 50 grand, and as odd as it seems to come out of my mouth, say I'll do an honest deal with a full-blown criminal to get an encryption key versus whatever the alternative track is. So Rita, would you agree with that? That just like BEC, there's just a lot under the waterline that just isn't visible.
Yes, and this highlights an issue that we can absolutely go in to talk about a little later, is that there has since been some guidance from regulators to come down to attempt to discourage the paying of that ransom. Unfortunately for us as law enforcement, but I guess fortunately for private industry, typically when ransom is paid, 90% of the time, you're getting your access back, you're getting that decryptor tool. They are going to honor their extortion requests, right? Because it would behoove them to, because then the next victim, as soon as people refuse to pay, then they have to change their threat pattern, right? Their habits. So discouraging the payment of that ransom is something that the regulators are attempting to do. And I will say this to your audience, my agency, we are not regulators. We are law enforcement officers, and it's our job to investigate these crimes. And sometimes the best investigative pivot that we have from responding to a ransomware incident is that pay to address for the ransom, or is the method of communication that you're going back and forth with that negotiator that I mentioned earlier. So I don't want to get too deep into the regulations unless you and your audience want to a little later. However, I will also highlight an additional source outside of the IC3 reports that presents a different number. And I checked it this morning, and it makes me twitch a little bit every time I check it. But there's another source called Ransomware, ransomwhe.re, that tracks via crowdsourcing total tracked ransomware payments. And you can actually break out the data by year, by particular variant. And the number that they reported as of a few minutes ago is 97.4 million. So, you see that. And again, that's a crowdsource. That's not you're reporting to law enforcement. That's just everyone on the back end reporting that actual ransomware note, reporting their payment just to data researchers. So treat that source with whatever kind of credibility that you choose to, but it's a very interesting insight to compare to the IC3 numbers, and then to compare to what we're getting when businesses pick up the phone and call, because we know that there is a very tough thought pattern and priority pattern and business decision that happens at that, hey, we have an incident moment.
Rita, we saw something interesting. You see that business email compromise came in at like 2.1 million last year, but then Visa, along with some other fintechs, reported that the identity theft industry is closer to $44 billion more recently. So I tend to believe private sector numbers, no offense, because it's scary to talk to you guys. It's scary to talk to the FBI. Like, I don't want black Suburbans rolling up in the middle of the night, right? But Rita, I'm going to put you on the hot seat a second, because I was thinking last night more about our conversation, and you had made the analogy, and I had said, look, the challenge that we have as businesses is we're trying to stay in business. And we didn't start a title company or grow into leadership or even be a vendor that supports this to try to fight a cyber war, right? It wasn't I wasn't sitting in 5th grade, counseling saying, you know what, I'd like to start a wire fraud prevention solution. Because I think there's going to be a problem out there one day. And I think just bringing it to ground level, if you're taking over with ransomware, and the ransom is something that you can pay, you ultimately end up in this almost moral and ethical dilemma, in the sense that if I pay it, I know it's likely funding the next person that'll get hit. But yet, if I don't pay it, what does that mean? I mean, am I out of business? Do I really have the insurance coverage around it? I mean, what you had made an analogy about the drop in the flood, and I'll let you say that again. I thought it was brilliant, but what's the thought process for most victims as you're working through whether or not they are or not going to pay a ransom?
Sure. The analogy that I shared with Tom yesterday was this idea that no single drop believes that they're responsible for the flood. And if all of us are, rightfully focusing on our own business, our own posture, our own industry, our own swim lane, we're likely not paying attention to these big numbers and these big trends across law enforcement and frankly, the Department of Defense at this point. Like you said, Tom, it's not your job to be concerned with the cyber warfare that frankly is going on in this space. However, again, I want to stress that right now, before any kind of incident, now is the time to do that assessment. Put yourself, your customers, your company in the position to not even have to have that internal debate. Whether that's something as simple as backup tapes, whether that's something as simple as not keeping information in a place that could be vulnerable, right? And I know that spending for proactive cybersecurity is something that falls in a long list of priorities that you and your already strained resources have to kind of reposition day in and day out. As someone who also has training in that best practices, and at the end of the day, that decision is a business decision, and that's your decision to make. Our goal as the Secret Service is to hopefully be that phone call again, before, during, and after an incident, so that we are not having to make that decision under fire, and maybe even not having to make that decision at all.
All right. Many of the people on the line are probably thinking like, what the hell are they still talking about? So let's get into some examples. Right? Recent examples attached just this year. And thank you, Rita, for the resource. I wasn't aware of ransomware, WHERE, but you can see some of these are very large numbers. And most of them, as I understand it, are demands against some type of cryptocurrency request or cryptocurrency wallet. So we talked about how funded, how organized, how orchestrated. I think, unfortunately, it just seems like it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think it's all of us leaning in as a collective. The impact, just some quotes, and I'll share this deck. There was a recent White House memo or bulletin that went out that spoke to ransomware and just the impact that it's having not only on the US economy, but also the national security issue. So this came out of the White House, the Deputy National Security Advisor, National Cybersecurity Center. One of the most significant threats facing organizations today, because of the complexity and because of the speed at which we're seeing these instances. This is one of the most concerning areas for our business, is that the global insurance markets are getting it handed to them right now on anything related to cyber insurance and cyber policies. And it's not so much direct. Yes, there are direct exposures, but even if it's not a direct exposure, meaning I'm not going to pay the BEC or the ransomware claim, there's still embedded in those policies an investigative and due diligence expense to make sure the company isn't further exposed to a loss that could trigger a claim. So while a claim might get denied, the insurance company could still absorb either tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in diligence that a third party has to be hired to perform. And with that, that's racking up against these losses. I do believe this to be true, is that as especially small to medium-sized companies, they're going to have to, they will likely be asked to go through actual security underwriting before a cyber insurance policy is issued in the future. I just think we're close for everything that I've heard from our examples or from our contacts in the global insurance markets, is there's going to be a pivot to say cyber insurance is no longer a privilege. It's going to be a right, and a right for those that are doing the work. So All right, Rita, let's go through some examples. Here is a phishing solicitation. You threw out a staggering and very scary number there that 70 to 80% of all ransomware starts with a phish. I would argue 90 to 95% of all BEC starts with a phish. So here's the common denominator of all of this. What does an email like this do? Here's a recent actual ransomware phish email that we had pulled off the web.
Yeah, so this is troubling in that at first glance, it looks legit, right? And between both of these threats, that common denominator and that weakest link in any cybersecurity posture is the human end user. And all humans are guilty of this, even those that are trained, even those that participate in webinars like this and know this is coming. You've got a seemingly legitimate Office 365 logo. You've got another one down at the bottom. You've got several hyperlinks to choose from. This one is rampant with opportunities to fall victim to just clicking on something that allows the bad actor to load that phishing malware. And it might just give them, again, that initial access at whatever user level clicks on one of these programs, one of these malicious executables. But that initial access allows the recon to happen. And again, going back to this idea of a structured network, there are literally entire teams of people who do just this piece of it, either building the phish or taking a phish that's successful and escalating that into administrative level privileges, doing that recon, finding the crown jewels in your networks, and then reporting back to the folks who have that encrypting and or exfiltration malware.
Stephen, I think what's interesting here is that it's as well crafted when we're talking about wire fraud as well, in the sense that like the awareness and readiness and what we're doing to empower and educate our teams and our referral partners around phishing is that first line of defense. But when you see something like this, I know it probably triggers a lot of things in your world as well.
100%. And right here, this is a great example of how the world of ransomware and BEC converge and then diverge. Here, it's sort of what the motive is of the threat actor pulling this off, right? One motive can be, hey, I want to get this username and password, and then I just want to go in, set up an email rule so I can auto forward out emails that talk about a pending transaction, invoices, wire transfer, anything like that, so I can focus on very subtle, very quiet, or they want to go the ransomware tactic, and I consider more coming in with a sledgehammer and really announcing their presence, obviously, with deploying the ransomware and then trying to solicit money that way. So it's sort of that's where the motives converge, but then they all will come back together again once they need to start moving any of the illicit gains or the ill-gotten gains, and then utilize the same sort of money mule networks and money laundering networks that are out there. So this is, I love this example, and shows how something as simple as this can lead to so many different things in the world of cybercrime and wire fraud.
So Rita, somebody unsuspectingly clicks on this link, and all of a sudden we see, and I have never actually seen a ransomware demand until, and I've intentionally, it's like one of those things you can't unsee, right? So I've intentionally stayed away from this, but just putting this deck together started to understand a little bit more about this. But this is a ransom demand, right? This is what you never want to see on your screen. Maybe walk through, we have this, and I think one other example.
Yes, so in each variant and each kind of crew, if you will, has their own flavor. In the CloudStar example, we saw those guys request that you download the Onion Router browser, configured browser, and only speak to them through a chat panel that lived in Tor. So again, going back to what I said earlier about how sometimes our most valuable investigative pivot is that pay-to address, right? Because that wallet, if it's in BTC, allows us to quickly go to the blockchain, do some blockchain exploration, and see what that particular wallet may be related to, or in a situation where ransom has been paid, see where that money is then later moved. There is a bit of a trend of demanding Monero. So if BTC is requested, you might pay a 5 or even 15% premium on the ransom, mostly because these guys want you to buy into the idea that Monero is much more difficult to track through any kind of blockchain. In fact, the Monero blockchain, it's not something that we really have all that great insight into. BTC, however, we do. So this looks like something where you would then scan that QR code. They gave you a status check to blockchain.info so that you can see where that wallet is. And typically you're dealing one-on-one with that negotiator via some sort of chat program, usually in Tor.
Then here's another flavor of that.
Yeah, and again, it's this weird thing where there's honor among thieves, right? It behooves them to actually give you the decryptor whenever you go ahead and pay that ransom, because otherwise you wouldn't really have that much motivation to pay it. We have seen folks, and it looks like there's an example here of a very easy, here's how to buy Bitcoin tutorial, because not everyone maybe has that experience. So again, BTC, that pay to address, it's a really valuable piece of information for us. Sometimes it's included just on the ransom note, like this example, it's grayed out here, but that pay to address is there. Other times you can't get it until you give that negotiator a victim ID or some sort of number so that they actually know what your job responds to. Because again, we're dealing with very organized, very professional, huge groups and kind of layers of folks. The same person that you are negotiating with is likely not the person who did that initial access, that recon, and then that privilege escalation. We're dealing with completely different layers of people in this criminal enterprise.
What fascinated me most, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way when I say it, what fascinated me most about this demand is that they're actually considering the experience of the victim. So they want to get paid. They're creating kind of this full service roadmap, if you will, that says, hey, I just took over your stuff, but we want to make it easy. I want you to have a good experience in paying me the ransom. And it might seem subtle, but again, it just shows the level of intelligence and the level of, I would guess, sophistication that it's ransomware as a service, no different than, title and settlement provided as sort of like, what does that experience look like end to end? And do we kind of take it to the next level to remove friction to get to that endpoint? And I see it all over just in this, the way this is laid up. It's incredible.
They want to make it as easy and as painless for you as possible. And we actually just saw just this past week a few things. One, an affiliate in the Conti ransomware variant shared all of their software and manuals. So we're anticipating a higher frequency of Conti style breaches, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses, because essentially now, I think about it like a franchise. If you had all of the material to set up your own franchise for free, and maybe you didn't have that skill set, why wouldn't you do that, right? And then another thing as well, we saw the decryption tool that was used for the Cassia ransomware incident over the July 4th holiday. We saw that get shared publicly on one of the forums where these folks go to operate and chat with other co-conspirators. So decryption tools exist. And again, this is another point for me to insert that idea of eat your vegetables. Please pick up the phone and call law enforcement. I won't even be as selfish to say pick up the phone and call either me or Steve directly, as long as you've got a law enforcement partner. And this can be someone at the state or local level, because our agency, we actually train state and local and tribal law enforcement officers to respond to these kinds of incidents. It's one of my proudest parts of our mission, whether that's the Bureau through their InfraGard infrastructure, or again, whether that is your local Secret Service cyber fraud task force. Just please pick up the phone and call somebody so that you know that what your options are, so that you can have that conversation with your own team, knowing everything that's available to you.
No, that's awesome. So here's another demand notice. What's interesting about this is they're parlaying this idea that you're lucky I hacked you and not some rookie, because I'm a pro and you're in good hands here. And I just thought if you actually read this, it's comical. This one was just comical. So let's talk about the decryption key. I know this was part of a wind down of another network, but I just wanted to display it. And I'm not a technologist by nature. And Rita, if you want to geek out, here's your runway to do it. But ultimately what they're saying is, pay me the ransom, we'll verify payment, and then we provide you a key that essentially gives you full access back to your system. I guess my question is, how do we know the benefit of the bargain truly? Like, how do I know there isn't some wormhole, there isn't some escape hatch that would let them back in if they've just taken over full, network access and potentially had been in for a while, scraping files and putting them on separate servers that under their control?
Tom, you highlight a great point, and unfortunately the answer is we don't. Right? We don't know that they haven't maintained access. We don't know that there isn't some sort of built-in persistence even after shutdown. The best advice that we can give is that you restore from your last known clean tape, and you lean on your partners either internally or externally, whether that's a managed service provider who their expertise is this area right here. And again, I know that is a tough a tough money game to play when resources are often spread so thin. But hopefully part of what your audience is taking away today is that this is really important, and it's a team effort. It's up to all of us, because again, if we can allow ourselves to no longer be that target-rich environment, perhaps we'll see a little bit of a break in just the rampant occurrences of these situations.
I want to jump ahead here. Here's an example. I'll just voice over this real quick. Here's an example where somebody must not have been paid, and they started an auction that essentially monetized data in the agricultural sector. So here's an example of how it could turn a different way, where they're monetizing the ransom and the data breach successfully on an open auction network. So let's talk about lowering risk, if we could, Rita. I know we just have a few minutes, and one question came in to the Q&A. And for all of you that are on, start posting up your questions in Q&A. This is we're very new, a very complex area of cybercrime. Rita is speaking to us right now at about a second grade level on what she knows, which I truly appreciate, Rita, more than you know. But let's walk, but there are things we can do, right? We talk about how bad stuff is and it almost feels perilous, but maybe walk through what is that low to high hanging fruit from an impact perspective that we should start thinking about and investing in.
Yeah, the lowest hanging fruit is keep everything up to date. Those software tools that you pay for, part of what you pay is that ongoing support, right? Whether that's critical vulnerability, those patches, those updates, make sure that you're deploying them. A lot of them are public. Everyone knows about Microsoft Patch Tuesday, right? So make sure that those updates are something that you are doing routinely, or that your IT team knows that is an expectation. Again, you're paying for that service. Make sure that you're getting everything out of it. And just to address quickly a question in that Q&A, yes, malware can absolutely be found and then deleted. However, we advise that you go from a clean backup, a clean tape, a known clean tape. Most of ransomware isn't all that technologically sophisticated, which is actually the bit of good information in this situation. Antivirus, yes, we have some people who in the big kind of targeted methodology where they're going after these big, Fortune 100 companies. They're using things that allows them not to be seen through antivirus, but most of our actors are using tools that will be caught by an average or a better than average antivirus solution. Again, this idea of clean backups, and then emails, right? I mean, that initial phishing, that initial end user experience, we as humans, we're the weakest link. And part of that comes back to agency culture, or company culture. Make sure that your users are educated, and there's some sort of maybe formal or informal education, like this webinar, for example, where they know that is typically the initial vector. And then finally, I love that you have this idea of whitelisting, right? Again, doing that hard assessment that sometimes might mean a bit of a different posture as far as how easy that data is accessed. But putting things where they should be, taking things down that maybe don't need to be up, and only doing that whitelisting to folks with a clear need to know.
And Stephen, what I love about this is this lowers the risk of wire fraud as well.
It does, 100%. We talked about this a lot, and I like to sort of get into the mind of the threat actors and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I always find it, and I even see it in the intercepted communications that we get, is if you put obstacles in front of them, you put up defenses, they pivot. They're like water. They take the path of least resistance. So if you're able to put up stuff to protect yourself and stay current with it, it really makes a big difference in what they're doing. And our whole goal here, a lot of times with these guys, is to start to get them to pivot to different things, because for them it's new and untested. So it's easier for us to kind of see if they screwed up, essentially, to see if they, use something that we can track a lot better, because it's not something new in practice for them. So, the more stuff we can throw in front of them, the better it is for everybody.
No, totally agree. And then Rita, I've been through a wire fraud incident. Thankfully have not been through anything ransomware or data breach related. Knock on, it's not quite wood, but close enough. Could you walk through the importance of having a proper incident plan, and when crisis hits, that we have the team and we have the roadmap to respond with a level of urgency that I would argue has never been more important than in 2021.
Such a great point. And Steve, you make great points as well. So I just want to reiterate that idea of having a plan that is created not under fire, having a plan that's created after considering all of these different layers, is going to be the best thing that arms you to perform in that situation under fire to the best of your ability. And one thing that's common of an incident response plan across different industries, across different size companies, is that a big piece of this is communication, whether that's an internal communication. Hey, who's managing what piece of this? Who's talking to law enforcement? Who is talking to our internal partners? Who's talking to maybe our clients or our front facing? Are those different people? Are they the same person? If they're the same person, what priority are we listing as far as who should be kept apprised of new information as it comes to light? The communication piece is a huge thing. And another thing that's key in an incident response plan, and this might sound elementary, but it really isn't, is defining when that incident has happened, right? Do we have a breach, yes or no? Has data been stolen, yes or no? And again, this is true in the BEC space. This is true in the ransomware space. But if you know the answers to those questions, and you know who is wearing what hat and when, it will only aid you in that situation where you call me or you call Stephen and everything seems to be melting around you, and we're under a time crunch, right? We're happy to be that call, but we would much rather hear from you before that 0 day, right? And we actually facilitate ransomware simulations as a service. And if that's something that anyone on the audience wants to get involved with, please let us know. We'll make sure that you're on the invite list for the next one that we have.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, you and I, we were speaking to Fortune 100 company executives earlier this year on BEC simulations, and I can't thank the service enough for doing those drills and reading the private sector in to just how it works and how it unfolds. And then what I found interesting is then there was a panel after that just spoke about what did we learn, where are the vulnerabilities, what are the takeaways, and again, this is a title industry. We're just trying to search public records and make sure ownership and liens are identified, and we got some money coming in and money coming out, and that's got all balanced. And all of a sudden, garage door opener keys and the deed passes. I mean, that's kind of that's the workflow. And we might need a little bit of grace as we step into a broader learning around how to keep ourselves and our referral partners and our customers safe in this area. Stephen, anything to add here on I mean, you and I have, it's like jumping out of the back of a plane when you're involved in a money recovery. You don't know where you're going to land. But just speak to in your experience, the importance of an incident response as it relates to BEC and wire fraud.
As always, time is of the essence. Tom, we've seen it. We've seen money move. I mean, the one from this morning we talked about, that was within hours of that money hitting the account and it was gone. So having the plan, knowing exactly what to do when these occur is just invaluable in terms of being able to recover both, financially and for your ability to operate. The faster you can move, the better. So again, having that plan in place and reporting things very quickly. Don't be shy to report these. I know it is a scary thing and it's been touched upon here, but you guys, the private sector, across all different niches and different industries, are our eyes and ears. You guys are seeing this before we see it because they're coming after you guys. So reporting to us, keeping an open line of communication, and responding to things quickly is one of the more important pillars we have in defending this and keeping everybody safe in the long run.
I wanted to share, and everyone will receive a copy of the deck, but there is a prep guide for ransomware that was put out both by the Secret Service and CISA. These are great great guides. I was reading them over the weekend during my family time, which my wife is very much used to. And so Stephen laughs. He was like, yeah, I know what that looks like.
I know that game.
Let me see if we have any other questions here. Yes, we will circulate a PDF. I've got to drop off here, and I'm actually have at 12 o'clock to educate a bunch of Georgia real estate lawyers on the issue of wire fraud. So you guys can keep me on prayer chain for the next 12 hours or next hour as a co-attorney. Rita, I cannot thank you enough. Stephen, can't thank you enough for the work that you do every single day. And I mean that. I mean, you guys are the heroes behind the curtain that are doing the things that none of us would even think about doing or even making a career out of that to make this world a safer place for us to continue to do business. I thank you for the time, and in behalf of everyone in the industry. Any closing remarks, go ahead, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't actually share with your audience, how to get in contact with us. I think the best way to do that is through the GIOC router. Steve, I don't know if you echo the same thing, but please reach out to us. We'll get you in the hands of the right person, whether that's someone, the boots on the ground in your area, in coordination with us here at headquarters who have that kind of 30,000-foot view perspective, combination of the two, or maybe even is someone at the state or local level who might be better served to respond to your incident. But Steve, if you want to go ahead and share that communication channel, just to reiterate it, I think that would be great.
Yep, I will put it in the chat here if I can. But in the meantime, it's GIOC, GIOC at usss.dhs.gov. Yeah, essentially we're a unit here located in Washington, D.C., and we cover all different forms of cyber-enabled financial crime. And reach out to us. We will put you in touch with who we need to be put in touch with, whether that's a private side partner, local partner, state partner, or one of our local field offices. But yeah, I'm going to type it in the response here. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you guys need anything. And everyone out there, just stay safe and stay vigilant. That's the most important thing.
Yes, great guys. Thank you. And if we haven't connected on LinkedIn, this is my kind of LinkedIn handle. We're constantly posting things up on trends and articles and things that are going on. And likewise, that's my direct dial. You'll get my assistant Liz. We can schedule time to talk, shoot me an email. I'm constantly, like everyone on the session here, working nonstop. So Rita, Stephen, thank you again for the time. This was so enlightening. It was a fantastic overview of this very important topic. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.